I did grab a chair.
But I still do. Some
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's all yours. They need air for the air mattress.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have one. I just bought the air mattress, but it doesn't automatically fall off.
Yeah.
So they call it kind of. Yeah, she just dropped it off. Just while I was getting ready. I think the little guy asked, "What do you think?" I was like, still here.
Sir.
You're not gonna make it this time.
Last time
Our quoting inherited some quilts that a man had made, and they were all hand stitched.
Wow.
Well, you know, and then, right now, in the quilting world, there are a lot of men who quilt. It's very popular, actually.
There's several designers that are made.
Yes, yes. Well, part of it, I think, well, of course, they started because their wives were doing it and they were interested.
She does.
I definitely want to go. But you know, after the bicentennial, when we sort of started quilting and it became popular, men decided, oh, there's money in this. Oh, this is sort of a viable business. And it is. And then women too, of course, have made a lot of money.
She started talking to
I'm a teenager. She's never told her she just never makes money. And well, some people, you know, travel the country and do that. I'll travel New York State, but I don't.
And she looked it all over and she goes, okay. And I said, okay. I said, I'll let my sister know.
And I teach 4 classes a week during 2 semesters, during the fall and during the spring. So I'm just getting ready to start in September again. And so I don't have time to do a lot of traveling in between as well, but I do go to different quilters guilds and historical societies. Historical societies and quilters guilds are, you know, really interested in quilting as a hobby and quilting as history too. So I do a lot of that. But I'm from the Buffalo, New York area. I live in Lockport actually, and I teach in the school systems through community education. So I teach in Williamsville and Kenmore, Kenton, and Star Point, which is my area, Lockport. And I've been doing it longer than most of you have been alive. Seriously. I started during that big bicentennial area when we were all making quilts, you know, in 1976. I started quilting in 1974, so guess how long ago?
Wow, that's awesome.
That was a really long, I was a tiny little child. But I belonged to a group of women through Buffalo State College actually, and we were a needlework group. And we were learning all different kinds of needlework. And one of the needlework ideas that came up was quilting. Oh, we should learn about quilts. And I never left. I just stayed there and quilting just, I don't know, there was something about it, I just enjoyed it. And I'm a math major, I'm a math teacher, and so that's why, I think that's why quilting stopped at, or I stopped at quilting, I guess, because I really do enjoy still putting something on graph paper and, you know, doing all of that. I'm doing that now for a class that I'm starting in the fall, and I'm not very creative, so I usually have to see a pattern or see a block or something, but I can look at the block and then I can change it into what I think would be easy to work with. And right now I've taken a carpenter's star block, which is sort of all jagged and whatever, and turned it into almost all half square triangles.
Oh.
So this is a 20-inch block. We're going to make a quilt with 20-inch blocks made from 2-inch sections.
Wow.
but they're almost all half square triangles.
Yeah.
So you can use, you know, an easy angle, you can use bangles, I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but anything to make half square triangles. And then it's like a puzzle, we're just gonna put it together in a puzzle. And hopefully everybody will say, oh, this is wonderful.
Do you
A lot of
oversize,
pieces.
do you oversize,
Pardon?
do you oversize and then trim?
Sometimes, but this time, no. I tend to like to oversize and trim, but my goal with this particular project is to use 2.5-inch strips. And so if you use 2.5-inch strips, you don't have any room to trim, you have to be right
You gotta
on.
be dead on.
But with either a paper sort of foundation thing, not really paper piecing, but a paper foundation thing that you can follow, or an easy angle, which is a triangle that fits right in the space that you want it to be. You just cut it and sew it, and you shouldn't have to trim anything. And so far, my little practice piece has worked really well for myself. So I'm encouraged that other people can do it. So that's the thing, I enjoy changing something around to make it work for my ladies. And I do 4 classes a week. I have between 15 and 25 people in class. And we go 8 weeks and 2 hours at a time. And nobody brings their sewing machine to class, because I've learned a long time ago that by the time you bring your machine, set it all up, get all ready,
You don't get any.
you don't have any time. And people are more comfortable taking things home and sewing them at home in their own space, their own time. So I do a lot of demonstrating and talking and telling them what to do and showing them what to do, and then they go home and do it. And I always hand out sheets like that. So
That's good, yes.
So I think we're a little past 7, so we probably should start.
2 minutes.
Okay, Brian McClellan, does everybody know Brian?
Yes.
Says, invited me to come back again. I'm very appreciative. I always enjoy coming here. And we were just talking, I think it's been at least 5 years that we've been doing this. And I've said, always like this, right here, this weather, always. But it never rains, really, it just pretends it's going to.
One time it did, remember we had to move in?
Yes, we did, well, and that was the first time we were in the building, but that was before COVID, they let us be in the building. And it poured, and you all still came. I was so amazed by that, because everybody came in the pouring rain. It was very nice. So this is a dedicated group of people, obviously. Thank you for coming. So this is called pre-cuts, really. I'm talking about pre-cuts. And so let me start with what are pre-cuts. Some of you know, I know, but remember I'm talking to everybody here, ladies. So we're gonna go to basics. And it's like having something that makes life easier. If you have a pie crust to make, and you start with the whole basic thing, you make a pie crust. But now they've come out with a pie crust that you just unroll and put on the pie plate, right? And then you just fix it a little bit, and there you are. So that's what we're doing here. And these were not known about really until we really started quilting. And as I've been saying, the bicentennial re-energized people to quilt, because for some reason when the bicentennial was coming, everybody decided we had to go back to our roots and we all had to make a quilt, and we almost all did. I mean, it's just the way it was. And so companies started thinking about what can we do? And one thing, when I started quilting, and I did in the early 70s, 74 I think was my first year probably that I took a class, and it was at the Amherst Museum in the time, and I was in a class with people, none of us knew what to do. The teacher was wonderful, and she taught us how to quilt, and then we said, well, we want to keep doing this, we love do it again. So we had a second class, and after that, she said, I've taught you all I know, we're done, this is it, there's no place to go. And we said, but wait, we want to do this. And so we formed a guild, and so the Amherst Quilters Guild started it's 49, we're on 48 or 49, I think 75 was our year that we started. And so we just have been going and going, and that's what happens to all of the people who end up quilting. They join a guild or they get together with a few friends, and it's a very social thing, and it's always been a social thing, even way back in the time period before. And I used to be a quilt appraiser. I've retired from that, but I have seen many, many, many quilts from 1860, 1870, 1850 even, not so many from the 1820s. They don't hold up that well, but I have seen them. So people have been quilting from early times, and it's just a comfortable thing to do. But we're trying to make it easier all the time. So we're always wondering, when did the rotary cutter come into place? And the rotary cutter, for people who don't know, is like a rolling pizza cutter for fabric. And we know it came into place probably in the early 90s, but nobody can see, well, maybe the 80s. And nobody can seem to pinpoint that.
I have.
Do you?
I have
Okay,
one from
80s
them.
then, good.
Probably the mid-80s.
There's actually, I belong to the American Quilt Study Group, and people do papers on these kinds of things, and somebody has written a paper and has put in as much as she can find, but still isn't quite sure when it started. We keep asking each other, all the quilters and the historians keep saying, well, when do you remember the first one, you know? And I'll show you when I remember the first one. But I'm gonna start with this. This is called a fat quarter, and I haven't opened it. I probably should, actually. This is something that you could buy at Joann Fabrics, and I'm not advocating buying fabric at Joann Fabrics for quilting, but they have come a long way. So I'm going to start with this mainly for the people who don't know what these are all about. But a fat quarter, and I have a towel at home that says a fat quarter is not a body part. A fat quarter is a quarter of a yard of fabric. Now, a yard of fabric is 36 inches long by about 40, 41, 42 inches wide. It's very, we don't know. It depends on the company.
It varies.
And it depends on how much. There's a selvage edge. There's an edge that's finished. And some companies make that selvage edge a whole inch wide on both ends, and some don't. So that changes the width of your fabric. But if you cut a piece of fabric from a yard, a fourth of a yard is how much?
9 inches.
Thank you, 9 inches. So you would cut 9 inches by 40 inches. Well, that's fine, but what if I wanted to make some big thing for my quilt? That 9 inches doesn't give me much space. So this is where somebody said, oh, let's cut it into quarters this way. So this is a quarter cut lengthwise and widthwise in half both ways. And so this is approximately 18 inches, 18 and 18 are 36, by 20 inches, 20 and 20 are 40. So 4 of these will make a whole yard, but this is called a fat quarter. And we started making fat quarters a really long time ago. Somebody decided it was a good idea, and it was because you really get more space to work with something if you want something a little larger. So then I'm blaming it on the Moda company. I'm not quite sure, but somebody came up with the idea of taking pieces of fabric and cutting them into 5-inch squares. Now, there are a lot of companies now that are cutting these fabrics into 5-inch squares and packaging them. And the idea is that it's a whole line of fabric that the company is producing. So they produce fabric in colorways. So you may get the same print, but in brown and purple and green and orange and whatever. And sometimes that's a whole series of fabrics that they want to call as a line. This particular one is William Morris fabric, and it's very interesting because we've got multiple designs, but in multiple colors. So it really is a sort of a nice one to have. And then they also decided, well, maybe we'll take the 5-inch squares and we'll cut them twice, vertically and horizontally, and we'll make 2.5-inch squares. And I use these as well, but most of the time, I mean, you can purchase this. You don't see them as much, but you can purchase them. Now, these are so old, this cost me $3.49. This cost me $8.49, so you know these are old. I haven't used them. But this is sort of fun because this is a package of 5-inch squares and a package of 2.5-inch squares that are exactly the same line of fabric. So now I've got 5 2.5-inch squares if I cut these in half and add this one to it, and that helps me to design some kind of a quilt, and I'll show you in a minute what I could have designed with it.
Linda, let me pass that.
Oh, yes, we can pass those around. And then we've gone to, okay, if we can have 5-inch squares, why can't we have 10-inch squares? So the company called Moda decided that they should call these some kind of food. For whatever reason, I don't know. Their 5-inch squares are usually called charm squares. And in Victorian times, charm squares, charm things, people collected things and they called them charm things. For example, a string of buttons. People would collect buttons, and that would be every button they could come up with that wasn't the same thing twice. And so they had all kinds of, it was very typical of Victorian where more was more, you know, in that time period. And so these were called charm squares, the 5-inch squares, I think in reference to that. But Moda came up with, and this isn't Moda, Moda came up with 10-inch squares, and Moda calls them layer cakes, right? This is a layer cake. This is Hoffman. Hoffman calls them crackers. Everybody calls them something different. This is blank fabric. Blank fabric calls them 5 by 5-inch squares.
Originals.
But people have got creative with their packages of squares, and now this is part of a package. I've used a lot of it, but all of these are polka dots, all the different polka dots. And you can now get 5-inch squares all the same color because maybe you want to just do something with them. And you can get them all solids or all prints or all the same print, or they've just gone crazy with packaging these things. And then, again, because of Moda, so this is like Kleenex. If I use something that's in my pocket, and it actually happens to be Kleenex, but if I use this, and it's Scotty's, I'm probably gonna call it a Kleenex, right?
Yes.
And I've been listening to a lot of British TV programs lately, and I don't know if you've noticed it, but lately I've been noticing anytime somebody vacuums the floor, and they do this a lot under it.
They're hoovering.
They hoover. They always hoover.
We're watching the same TV.
But isn't it interesting? All of a sudden, I'm noticing that. I have never heard anybody on a British program say, I am vacuuming the floor. They always say, well, you need to hoover that. I'm going to hoover now. I mean, they really, really do hoover things. So this, in the language of Moda, is called a jelly roll, right? A jelly roll. And what it is a bunch, and these again are all the same print. These are all polka dots, and this is my favorite, and it's probably not Moda. I'm pretty sure it's not Moda, but this is my favorite fabric, and it's called grunge. Grunge
It is
fabric.
Moda.
It's one of my favorite fabrics.
Grunge is Moda.
Is it Moda? Good.
Yeah.
Okay. It looks a little grungy. I mean, that's really, you know.
It looks like acid wash blue
There you
jeans.
go, it does. Acid wash blue jeans is perfect. And so, but a series of strips, and there are usually 40 to 42 5-inch squares in a package. There are usually 40 to 42 2.5-inch by 40-inch strips in a package. I feel like the Vegematic man now. But they're really cool because, and I was just saying before we started that I decided to take a pattern and turn it into 2.5-inch squares. And so I'm using these strips, actually. I'm putting the strips together and I'm cutting 2.5-inch squares from them, and I'm just sewing them down here and opening it up, and I've got a pair of triangles, you see. And so this part's already done for you, and that's, I think, the cool thing about these pre-cuts. Part of it's already done for you. This is gonna be accurate. Now, I can pass these around too. You'll notice that that's got a little bit of a pinked edge. This also has a pinked edge. This pinked edge is a little wider. This has a pinked edge. This has a pinked, almost every one now has a pinked edge. Why? Because when they're all cut up, they fray like crazy. And so they decided to pink the edges so it will fray less. But in my classes, of course, I have people coming and bringing all kinds of fabric that they've bought all different places. In some cases, they pinked the edges so deeply that you're losing that 2.5-inch width that you're supposed to have. And so sometimes you have to look and say, well, where's the 2.5? Is it on the outside or is it on the inside of that? And right now I'm using 2 different brands of fabric for my 2.5-inch squares, and they're a little bit different size. They're just a little bit different, and I think it depends on how they decided to do the pinking. So you've got to sort of think about those things when you're using
That was
it.
actually gonna be my question, do you trim off that? when
No,
you make that
no.
severe-
You
that
just
severe?
use it as is, and you measure it, and you say,
So you make
okay.
a decision whether or not you're gonna use the outside or the inside,
Yeah.
and you just leave it
And,
at that.
and in general, when we're sewing something with something like that, as long as we're consistent, it really doesn't matter. I really don't care if they're 2.5 or 2 7/8 or well, I care about that, but I mean, 2 3/8 maybe, or 2 and 1, some 16th, and that's about what it is. So as long as they're consistent, we're pretty good. But in one case, somebody brought to class something that was close to 2 1/4, and we were working with something that had to be 2 1/2. That you've got to pay attention to. If you're working with them exclusively, you're fine, but if you're putting them with other things, and they're not the 2 1/2 they're supposed to be, she ended up taking it back to the store and said, listen, this is not good. And this was a brand name. This was not some cheap package. We were frustrated. So, okay, from
Yeah.
that,
That pinking helps with the raveling because
exactly, that's the whole point.
it does help.
Yeah, it really does help, and that is why they paint them, and it does ravel, and it's still, like, I was working with a black shirt just yesterday, and I was all white fuzz on my black shirt. You're still gonna get that kind of thing happening, but it's better. I feel like this is going to dry and movie. So now I wanna show you the beginnings of, what you can do with 5-inch squares. We're gonna work our way to the other sizes, but this starts out as just 5-inch squares, and you're gonna have to walk here with those people. I can't.
It's okay.
You
can blow away.
And so this is a what did I call it? Snowstorm. Snowstorm is what I call it. It sort of swirled to me. And it was just a package of 5-inch squares, or maybe a little more. And I liked the look of the colors, I just liked the colors. And so I just put them together that looked sort of swirly. And these are applique on. They're the kind that sort of stick on, you iron on them. And so I ironed them on. They're Edita Sitar, if you are familiar.
Yep.
They're Edita Sitar brand, on sale, because her stuff is very expensive. So this is on sale. But I just stitched a line down every single vein or whatever. I just stitched a line down, and it's now quilted as well, and so it's held up fine, and I don't usually wash things very much anyway, so it's been fine. But that's just plain old 5-inch squares. And then we're going to adding a little bit to our 5-inch squares. So the next thing, I think I want to do that. Yep, I want to do this. So most of you, if you're a quilter, are familiar with the name of Pat Sloan.
Yep.
And this is a free pattern that you can get online. And it's a very popular pattern for making charity quilts, you know, to give to people in need, or for kids, children's quilts. So this is an example of that pattern. I think it's just wonderful. So you're taking 5-inch squares, and then you're putting a few little stars in there. No.
Do you want help?
There we go. You're putting a few, oh yes, you're putting a few little stars in there, and it just makes it more interesting. This is a great child's quilt. I just love it for children's quilts. Very simple, easy to do. So I can pass the Pat Sloan pattern around if you'd like to. You go to patsloan.com, I think it is, but she
No,
also
I love
on
to
the
make
back,
quilts.
there's a table runner that is also free on the site. And then we go a little bit step further. Oh, we could pass this around too. These are some things that my students have made from mostly 5-inch squares, 10-inch squares. So here again, 5-inch squares, but what she did was periodically just put a pinwheel, right? And these are all scrap fabrics that she's had left over. This is another child's quilt. And so it's just something, doesn't have to be a pinwheel, but just think about it. Take your 5-inch squares and put something in with it that's consistent, and it makes it a whole different different design that's fun to do. Now I talked about that series of 5-inch squares with the extra, and I guess we passed it around, the series of 5-inch squares, and then that extra little package of 2.5-inch squares would give me 5 of the same thing. And when we make a 9-patch, when we make a 9-patch design, we have one square that say it's red, and the other square is blue, and we'd go red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red. So we got 5 of one color, 4 of another color. And generally, we make the 4 corners and the middle that same distinct color, and maybe the in-between squares might be what we consider background, something not so interesting. Well, when you don't have 5 of the same thing, but you have 4 of the same thing, you get something like this. And so this was the first time I had seen a package of 5-inch squares, and I do need help holding.
Something's flying over there.
So this, oh, thank you. That might be your job. Oh, yeah, it's not that important, so that might be your job. Pay attention to that, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll put that on. So this is a set of fabrics that came from the Smithsonian, from a quilt that the Smithsonian copied. And it was called the Rising Sun, and it was made by Betsy Totten in the 1850s. So this is a copy of fabrics from the 1850s. All the fabrics in this quilt are copies, reproductions of the 1850s. Look there, you see it over there. Did they? Okay. So what I want you to notice is that I only had 5-inch squares. And that's the first time I'd ever seen anything offered like that. Here's our line of fabric in 5-inch squares. And the idea, of course, was that you would like a particular one and then you would buy more of it, which I did. So my background and my borders are yardage that I purchased after I'd seen the fabric. But I used the 5-inch squares, cut them in half and in half again. So the 4 middles are that fabric that was part of the line, and then my background was just a plain sort of off-white, and that was the 4 corners and the center. And so I used it a different way, I think, than you would think to use it, but I didn't know what else to do with it, because I only had 4. And 9 patches are always easy to make and always fun. And by putting it on point, it gives you a little bit more size, a little bit more interest. But that's 5-inch squares. They're starting to see this. And then we're going to go to this. Pretty soon I'm going to show you how to make something, but we're doing this first. This started out as a top that I purchased. Yeah, I do. It started out as a top that I purchased a long time ago. I don't know if you're familiar with Paducah, Kentucky, which is sort of the mecca for quilters. I don't know where we're going here. The mecca for quilters. So in Paducah, they have all kinds of vendors, and this is a vendor who was selling antique and vintage quilts. This is probably from the 1940s, and this lady over here just brought in to show me some quilts that were mostly 1940s fabric. And so this might look familiar to her as a kind of fabric that
This was something.
it was a top that was made.
So that yellow is from way back.
It is.
Did you hand quilt this?
I didn't,
It's
but
the-
it is hand quilted.
Is the
Wow.
reproduction from back then, or
No,
it's the
it's
original
real.
one?
It's original. So when you look at this and you say, oh my gosh, it's a bright yellow. Oh my gosh, that's not that funny yellow that I remember from the 30s, right? This is more from the 40s, I believe. And we always date a quilt by the last fabric in it. And I haven't looked at every single fabric, but in general, I feel 1940s for the most part of these fabrics. So what I did, I purchased the top, and I purchased it because I wanted, you can put your own down.
No, I'm fine. It's so
But
beautiful. I know everybody wants to
It,
just admire it.
I wanted to show people what that era of fabrics looked like, and this was a really good example of that era of fabrics. 1930s fabrics are in here, and they're sort of usually little prints, little floral prints. 1940s got brighter, and the print started being bigger and farther away from each other, and that's sort of how you can tell the difference. Almost the same as the 30s, but the colors brightened, the print sort of got bigger, and that's why I feel most of these are more like the 40s prints. But it's a sort of a funky one when you think about how she put this together. It really is
It almost
sort of.
looks like she fussy cut some of these as well, like,
I-
you know,
I,
like
she
she's got
did.
that
I
red.
think she did,
and the
but she
flowers.
didn't mostly. It's not
Right.
really mostly, but yeah, things like that just sort of stand right out to you, don't they?
Yes.
And these are all 9 patches. Can you tell? These are all 9 patches. So she made, which is 9 little squares. These are basically 1 inch. And the interesting thing is they're not really 1 inch because she just eyeballed this. She didn't, I can tell. She used an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, not 1/4 of an inch. So the seam allowances were very small. And so I had it as a top forever. I wanted to use it, and I said, it ought to be quilted. I should quilt this.
Thank you.
I, who know how to quilt, don't have time to quilt anymore. And so I have an Amish family, really, who has quilted for me in the past. And so I took this to the Amish family, and this is in the Silver Creek area. Now they're in, where are they at?
It's just outside of Jamestown.
I know.
Forestville.
Faulkner.
Forestville?
Faulkner.
Faulkner? It's not Faulkner, but it's an F.
Frewsburg.
Frewsburg.
Thank you, Frewsburg. Okay, so anyway, they're in Frewsburg.
Yeah.
And so I took it there and I said, and this is a young lady who's got a million children, but she's a young woman. And I said, I thought probably the best thing we could do is to quilt an X in each of the 9 patches. That would be an easy way to go, and then do something pretty in the solid areas. And so I just gave it to her, and she finished it, and she wrote me a letter and said, it's ready, please come and pick it up, because we don't fall on the phone. And so I picked it up, and she said, I hope you don't mind, but it just didn't feel like enough, so I put an X in each one of those squares. She's quilted, we'll pass it around. She quilted an X in every single one of the squares.
If those seam allowances are only 1/8 of an inch, it probably was
It
a really
needed it.
good idea.
And she knew that, I'm sure. She just did a beautiful job, and I'm thrilled to death to have it. And I've put my daughter's name on it, but my daughter's not seen it yet, and I've had this for several years. I keep using it. So someday she'll have it, because she loves 30s and 40s, but it's not hers yet. But I used it as a class sample to teach a class on doing this. And I have ladies who come come back to class the next semester. So in the spring, I said, next fall, we're going to we're going to be doing something with pretty much 1-inch squares and 3-inch 9 patches. And everybody groaned and moaned and said, I don't think I'll be back to class, and whatever. And I said, you've got to trust me, you're going to love this. And so, I said, over the summer, why don't you try making some 9 patches? This is scrappy, make it scrappy. Make some 9 patches and see what you think. Maybe you'll like this. So over the summer, periodically, I would get a call or an email. I've made 243. How many? It's addictive, and it really is addictive. So many people had too many. So I designed a quilt very similar to that, but I made it a little bit more even and sensible and whatever. But I, being the lazy quilter, only made the center panel. I figured, well, you all can follow my directions. Well, I'm just going to make a center panel. And I made it completely different because I wanted to give them an idea of what you could do if it wasn't the 30s, 40s era fabric. So I used batiks. And I did this one.
Oh, yeah.
And this is just a fun thing, but these are 9 patches.
Now, did you make strip sets?
No, what I did was
Did
use
they all-
5-inch squares. So, you've gotta imagine, because I didn't bring a sample, but, okay, so I did 2 5-inch squares. Say again, I've got the red and blue 5-inch squares. I took 2 5-inch squares. I cut strips that are 1.5 inches, right? 1.5 and 1.5 and 1.5 give you 4.5 inches, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I cut 1.5, 1.5, 1.5 of the red, 1.5, 1.5, 1.5 of the blue. Now, the way a 5-inch or a 9 patch goes is you do make strip sets then. So I did a strip of red, a strip of blue, and a strip of red. Got that? Okay, then over here, I did a strip of blue, a strip of red, and a strip of blue, right? Because I've got 3 of the red and 3 of the blue. So I made a red, blue, red one, and I made a blue, red, blue one, and then I combined them together, and I got 2 9 patches from 2 5-inch squares. Are you following me?
Yeah.
Good. So it's easy to figure out if I wanted 50 9 patches, I need 50 5-inch squares to start with, and I'm going to have companions. So if you look at this, you'll see the companions, and I can't point them out right here, but I'll send it around and you can find them. So I have, if this is pink and red with the red on the inside, then I've got a red and pink probably there with a red on the outside. And so that's the same for all of these. I made pairs and just sprinkled them about. And when I did this, I made a section and I made these whole and then I chopped them off. It kills you to do that, but it's much easier than trying to make triangular 9-patch pieces. That's ridiculous. So I just made a whole thing, cut them off, and then, you know, sewed this together. So I don't know, where do I go?
If you really wanted them to do fun, is to say, do a disappearing 9-patch with that.
Yes, you could.
Oh, you
And I
can.
did, I have a wonderful boutique disappearing 9-patch quilt that I absolutely love, and it really
It's
works
fun.
beautifully with, yeah, it really does. Okay, so
Do you have that pattern?
I don't really, cause I just sort of made it up for my class, and I have it, but you know, it's not a pattern, I just gave them the directions on what to do, but, yeah, I made a whole pattern someplace.
But when you cut for your triangular pieces, did you use both triangles then?
Yeah,
Okay.
How,
no,
You
not when I cut them off, no, I
Okay.
couldn't, because
So
I
you
had to go
made
more
more
than a half. I had to go, you know, when you cut for the triangle, you have to go over a half for the seam allowances,
Right.
so no, I didn't. For the corners, I thought, for the corners, I made sort of, you know, but I made the corners all separate.
Okay.
I didn't cut the end half, yeah. Okay, that's done. Now I wanna talk about some easy ways to do what you can do with 5-inch squares. And I've done a lot of 5-inch squares, you can see, but we'll work our way to 10s in a minute.
That's a guy's.
But here's an example of a very simple table runner, and this is the first page that you have in your bunch of, papers. So if I can not let that blow away, here's the first table runner. Okay, it's just 5-inch squares, really. Okay, and some fabric that I use similar for the background. So this is part of a package of 5-inch squares. You can make a couple of table runners for this. And let me put it up here, and I think you'll see. I'm going to go this way. I think you'll see. So we're just taking two fabrics and sewing them together, and many of you already know how to do 2 squares and cut in between, but let me mention that to everybody. So we're going to take, that's that. Okay, so we're going to take 2 different fabrics, 2 5-inch squares, put them right sides together, and then I'm going to draw a line down the middle. You all if you're a quilter, you've done this. I'm just doing it for non-quilters, actually. Because average quilter has done this. So we're going to draw a line down the middle, and then we're going to sew, and we use 1/4-inch seam allowances. So we're going to sew a 1/4 inch to the right of the line, a 1/4 inch to the left of the line. Okay? And then we're going to cut on the line. So we've done this much, and we've cut it apart. So here's that. We've cut it apart, and when we cut it apart, we get triangles sewn together. So you don't have to cut a triangle and sew a triangle to a triangle. You cut 2 squares, you sew down the middle, cut them apart, and you've got your 2 triangles. So somebody very clever, and I think it was Mary Ellen Hopkins actually, years ago, decided this is a way to go. And it is. And when you do this, you get 2 of the same thing, right? 2 of the same thing. So if you look at this, that's all this is, right? We've got 2 triangles, 2 triangles, and we're going to put them in place. So when I put the triangles in place, I'm gonna sew them this way. I'm gonna sew 2 triangles to each other in a straight line, and then I'm going to end with a triangle to straighten that all out. And my triangle that I end with, and it's on your sheet, I'm going to just use this. Okay, here's a triangle. That's what I did. I put 2 together and I put the triangle there. That's all I did. But if you have a triangle and you just cut a triangle in half, all of this is now stretchy because that's the diagonal of the triangle, and the diagonal of a fabric is the stretchiest part. And so when you do that, and all along the edge, there's a chance for your edge to stretch out. So what I prefer to do is take a square of fabric, and if I cut a square in half on the diagonal both ways, that longest side of the triangle is now the straight edge of that square, right? The longest side of the triangle is now the straight edge of the square. So this is a better way to go. Instead of taking a little square and cutting it in half once, take a bigger square and cut it twice on the diagonal.
And doing it that way, you're also working on the straight of the grain instead of the bias. So you're not going to.
So this is going to be, well, it's on your paper. So take a look, because I think it's 7 inches. But I would like to make it even a little big. 7 inches is what you need. I like to make it a little bigger. Talk about cutting something bigger and trimming it down. This time I want to do that. So I would make it a little bigger. When you do that, you sew with the point perfect and just let it stick out a little bit beyond your other piece. Don't stretch, because now this is stretching. But start with the points perfect, the corner of the square and the corner of the triangle the same. And you've got a little bit left over. If it's all even, you can just have a little bit extra all around the edge. If it's not all even, you trim it after you're all done, leaving 1/4 of an inch for a seam allowance, and then that's the way to go. So when we do this, it's just simply putting squares together. So we've got the next row, and the next row. This time, we have a triangle up here, and a triangle down there. Do you see where we are? Can everybody see that? Can you see it over here? So once you've done this much, you're just turning it around and you're doing it all again. That's the whole piece. So I've gone back this way. So we've got this one, and then this one is this one, and then that last one, which probably already fell, is the last one. That's the one over here on this edge. Okay, so that's all there is to that. It's a real easy one to do. Even a non-quilter, I think, could do that. So the next one is very similar, just a little bit different, and of course I don't know where it is. Luckily, I probably don't need it. Oh, that says 7 inches. That was to remind me what to tell you. Okay. This is the next one in your sheet. Oh, and this shows much better. That X, okay, there's the X. That shows that much better. That's how you're going to cut this, okay? And again, this is the same right here. It's the same triangle. That's why I did 7 inches, because it's exactly the same triangle as as you would cut, if you cut it in, square it half, it's hopeless. Thank you. Thank you. But,
You have to wear a flannel shirt
yes,
inside out.
I should, yes.
And be your own
Actually,
demo.
believe it or not, because I do this a lot, one of my classes made me this kind of a thing. And actually, that's got the loop on it too, with a loop to go around. I'm supposed to be walking around with this. A loop around, so I can hold it.
You've seen that one?
Look through
So you got a sidewalk for
You've
it.
seen it?
Yeah, and luckily, I'm not a very large person in certain areas. So. Okay, so this is really the same thing. So I don't think I get too much. But it's made up of two basic things. So here we are. This is that next one. And I do have to apologize for those black and white pictures that are really hard to, it's really hard to make that look like anything. But these are the pieces you're using. So we started with 5-inch squares, cut them into squares, and this also works for 2.5-inch strips because they're gonna be 2.5 inches when you cut them into 4, right? So you start with that, and then you still have that triangle that you need, you still have that sort of background triangle fabric, but we've got two things here. There's this, which is called a 4-patch, you can tell why, right? 4 pieces. And this is all that you see going around through the middle, right? Four of those. And then, look at this. This is actually 3 squares. It could be a rectangle if you wanted it to be in a square and another square. But I used 2.5 inch squares. So this is this part. You see that? That. Can everybody tell? So that's all it is. It's these 2 things sewn together. Once again, we sew them together and we stick a triangle on the end. Yes.
Could you move over this way and show
Absolutely.
us? Thank
Yes.
you.
See, that's what you had to do. That was good. Good job. Yeah. So this is really working its way down the center, okay? And then these are above and below this one. And, but I'm sewing them together the same way. I'm putting 2 together with a triangle, 3 together with a triangle, 4 together with a triangle. So this is this one, and here's that one. And, well, I'm in your way. And so this is the next one. There it is.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then
Thank you.
this is that one, okay? And so we're working our way that way. Okay. So that's an easy one to do too. And here's the interesting thing, and I can pass these around. Here, I'll take this away. Print yourself. But put one over here, one there, and one here. Because I have no batting in here. I have nothing in the middle. And I have quilted it by stitching around the outside edge and letting it be. I can stitch through if I want to hold it all together. Sometimes I do that. But I don't have any batting in it. I don't like my table runners to be wobbly. I want to put them on the table with maybe a candle or something, and I don't want it to be soft.
I found that the fusible fleece,
Yes, I've used that.
that doesn't add a whole
Right.
great deal
In
of
fact, I
thickness.
have one here with a fusible fleece in it, and that does work pretty well. And Pellon from Joanne Fabrics, Pellon products that are fusible or not, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Will work quite nicely with that. Something very, very thin. But remember, I'm a lazy quilter, so if you don't have any batting, that's even easier. Right? So you don't need to think a lot. So that's the kind of thing we're doing for that. Now, I wanna go to the next page, which, is that applique? Okay. This is just a quick thing. Excuse me. I put it over here. More than anything, this is a reminder that 5-inch squares don't have to be used for patchwork. So this is just a little mug rug. Okay, simple little mug rug. Put your mug on for your tea, coffee, hot chocolate, whatever. And it's made from 5-inch squares. So, for example, now I gave you on that some samples that you can trace. Okay, this is layered. So the blue and the red and the yellow are just layered and fused. I just layered and fused them. I didn't do anything but layer and fuse. And then I went around everything with a tiny little zigzag stitch on my sewing machine. So it doesn't have to be hand applique. There's no hand work. Well, there is. I always hand applique my binding on the back. But it's fused basically. And when you want to do something like a circle, maybe I just want to put a circle on a square. 2 5-inch squares right there. And so what I've done is one of two things. I'm going to start with the square, okay? I'm going to start with the square. I'm going to put something, another piece of fabric, or in this case, an interfacing, a too thin interfacing. Don't use this thin one, it's too thin. But an interfacing, right sides together. And I'm going to stitch around the circle that I've drawn on the interfacing, all completely around. And then I'm going to cut a slit in the middle of the backing, what I'm considering the backing, and turn it right side out. Now, this was too thin. It was a practice thing, and it's tearing too easily.
Dryer sheets, use dryer sheets.
Yes, dryer sheets are good. Yes, you're right, they are perfect.
Used ones.
Used dryer sheets, exactly. Well, really, because they're softer when they're used dry. You really want used dryer sheets. Here's another way to go. Just take 2 of the same, or different, doesn't matter, two 5-inch squares, do that same circle thing, and then turn it inside out. But here again is my cut piece, okay? So I've turned it right side out. You're only as good as your circle has been sewn to begin with, so you've got to be careful when you're sewing that circle. And then you applique it to the background. Again, I usually use, you can use a straight stitch. I use a little tiny zigzag, but a straight stitch is fine. And then that gives you something like this, and I gave you a star, and I gave you a heart. So you can do all kinds of things with this. And when you are appliquing something onto a piece of fabric, it's a good idea to put a piece of paper or interfacing or something, dryer sheet again, something on the back to keep it stable. So I can pass these around. Don't look at my circle that well, just look at it for the idea. But I just wanted to remind you that 5-inch squares are good for other things. Okay, this next one on your next sheet, I really like this pattern. And it's a little bit involved, and I'm probably going way over. Hopefully he's paying attention inside. I'm just gonna
We're good.
apologize to him. That's all.
No, you take as long as you want.
So, let me show you this pattern that I think is great fun. It's been blowing all over the place. Oh, here, let me, before I lose all of this, just dawned on me.
Rescue.
Here's some change. Okay.
Oh.
What would I do without you? And you've been doing this for for a few years. He really has. He's been doing it since he was a little thing. Okay. This is called a chain block. And this was for my Irish whatever days. But this is the pattern. This is called a chain block. Okay? It's an old pattern that's been around forever. I don't know how old, but I've seen it as an old quilt, as at least a vintage, which I consider to be early, 20s, 1900s and up, I think is vintage. And so what I did was use 2.5-inch strips. Remember we talked about strips. 2.5-inch strips, and I just put 3 blocks together, and here is a table runner, dresser scarf, whatever. And it's just fun. It's 3 blocks sewn together. That's all it is. But because I've used the 2.5-inch strips, and this is my grunge one, because I've used the 2.5-inch strips, half of this was done for me, right? I didn't have to cut into strips first. I had strips to start. So, and this, I'll pass this around because this does have, I can't remember what I put in it, but something very thin. Something very thin, and I think it was some kind of a Pellon product. I'm pretty sure that that's what I used. So we can pass it around. And then I had leftovers from that, so I just put them all together. And I think this is funner. So these are the pieces that were left over from cutting those other pieces. And I just put them wherever I thought they would work, and they did. It's a fun thing. And this is an easy pillow to do. For a pillow, a lazy pillow, I take 2 pieces for the backing, and I make them as big as the pillow top, if not a little bit bigger. And actually a little bit bigger because I'm putting this edge on it. So a little bit bigger than the pillow top. 2 pieces. I fold each one down by about 1/4 to 1/3. So I've taken 1 piece and I folded it down about 1/4 to 1/3. I've taken the second exact same color and everything piece and I folded it up 1/4 to 1/3. Now I'm putting it right sides together with my pillow. And I'm going to stitch around the whole thing, and I'm going to bring the back around to the front when I stitch. So I've just brought the back around to the front when I stitch, and I go around the whole thing because I have an opening when I'm all done. Remember, these are right sides together. I'm going to turn everything inside out through the opening, and it's just going to hold in place. I don't even stitch along here. You don't need to. I've got enough folded down that I don't have to. And so I'll send this around because when you look at the edge, it looks like I've put a cording on it. And I haven't. I just kept batting in there, made my batting a little bit bigger, and then I folded it around and around again so that I've taken care of the raw edge. And by the way, when you're at a corner and you're doing something like this, you fold the middle of the corner down first, and then the one side in, and then the other side in, and that gives you a nice, neat corner. So anytime you're doing something like this, middle of the corner down first, then the one side, then the other side, and it gives you a nice mitered corner. So it's just an easy way to. These are good for selling at a whatever craft show or something. Okay. Oh, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so this is how it goes. We'll see if we can do this with a minute. Take out that sheet for the chain. Okay, look at the sheet for the chain. We're going to start cutting. We're going to cut the same thing of 2 colors. So I'm back to my red and blue here. And we're going to do 2 of everything. So I'm going to cut 2 red squares. I don't know where to go. 2 red rectangles, 2.5 by 4.5. 2 red rectangles, 2.5 by 8.5. So can everybody see what that is? Okay. Then we're gonna do the same thing with blue, okay? Blue squares, blue rectangles, big blue rectangles. Okay, have 2 of everything, 2 reds, 2 blues. And then we're going to cut 5 2.5-inch squares of what I'm calling background. It doesn't matter what it is, but the same, whatever that is. 5 of those, and what did I say? 4 and a half inch squares. These are like the corners, okay? 4 of those. See the corners on the pillow there? They're for the corners. Okay, that's how we cut. Now we're gonna sew. And again, we're gonna do the same for the red and the same for the blue. We're gonna sew a background square to a red square. Do 2 of those. 2 of these. And then we're gonna sew a background square to a blue square, 2 of those, okay? And then we're going to put it into position so that, and the only reason I'm saying, do what I told you to do, because if you do it different than I've shown you, it's not gonna look like the picture when you're following along on the picture. Now, you wanna do this backwards from what I did, that's fine. But remember, the whole thing's gonna be backwards, so you've gotta pay attention to that. So I would say, the first time you do this, make it look exactly like my picture, and then you're gonna be okay, because you'll figure it out. Okay, so we've got these 2, and I'm sorry, that's cream on cream here. But once we put this in place, you can see cream and blue, right? Or cream and red. Okay, once we put this in place, we're going to sew that 4.5-inch rectangle like that. Okay? Twice. And we're gonna do the same thing for the other color. So we're gonna put this together. There's that 4.5-inch rectangle. Again, 2 of them. Got that? Okay. Next step. Oh, yes. Next step is to take those 4.5-inch squares and sew them, and again, I'm sorry they're white, but they are. Sew them below the little L-shaped thing you got going there. You see that? Everybody see that? Okay. That's your next step. Then we're going to take the longer strips. Remember, we got longer strips. Now, we did red and red together, blue and blue together. Now, we're going to change this. Give myself a little room. And we're going to put a blue long strip with the red and a red long strip with the blue. Okay? Got it? Again, 2 of everything. Ready? Okay. So once we've done that, we've got things that look like this. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
2 again are here. 2.
They already got it.
Okay. That's what they look like. We're doing 2 of each again. 2 of each.
That's okay.
Okay.
You have to stretch my legs.
I should be making airplanes. Okay, now we're ready to put it together. What? Oh my gosh, thank you. Okay. I'm ready to put it together. And remember, you cut 5 of those little white squares. We've only used 4 of them. So now, look at the part where you're going to put them together. And we're going to start with this one, and it could be another color, but to be consistent, do the one I did. And I'm gonna put that last background square on the bottom right-hand corner of this piece. You see it? Bottom right-hand corner of this piece. But I'm only going to sew it halfway across. So, partial seam. It's called the partial seam. We're gonna put this here, we're gonna put it in place that way, but I'm only sewing, are we in trouble? We are in trouble. I'll hang on to them, where the other door. Of course you do. You might just have to stand there and hang on.
You've got slippery fingers.
Okay. Okay, so, do you see where we've got a partial seam, right? We've only sewn that far, halfway. So that's my first piece that's gonna go into place. I'll pin it. Let's see if we can.
Oh,
come on.
run.
Oh my goodness.
Teddy just stand up there,
Thank
hold
you.
him up.
Everything else is here.
Just like sit on these tables.
Okay. Second piece
That's what it's on.
is, now this is a rectangle, so the second one is gonna go this way, and I've got, I've got a blue sort of L-shaped thing. So I started with the red with the long piece. I want the blue long piece to be next, and I'm gonna put it in this position. You see what I did? Okay, so I did the blue long piece, so that means now I wanna do the red long piece. And you can see how it's developed. Okay, see that? And so my blue long piece is next, and you can see where it's gotta go.
No.
Oh, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Okay, so when I put this in place, now every time I'm doing that, I'm sewing, right? I'm sewing a whole straight line. I'm just sewing one straight line every single time. And the reason I put this first one as a partial here is because now, okay, here's the partial one. Now when I sew this piece to it, this will have been sewn, this piece to it, I can sew all the way down there, right? I can sew it all the way straight down, but when I'm ready to sew this half to the other half across the top, I can just continue on and keep sewing where I didn't sew before. And the idea behind the whole thing is I don't have to set in this little square in the middle. Just hang on to it. So do you see the idea behind it?
Yeah.
So it's so that we don't have to set in that square, because otherwise we're sewing around a square. Some point you'd have to sew up and over, or over and down, or whatever. This way, by only sewing it halfway, we still have the ability to lift it up, move it, sew all the way across where we started from, and then you don't have to set in the square. So I think that's very clever, and it's not my design, but any time I've ever done anything like this, I will use this method. And it works for other quilts as well. So just think about that method. If it's not explained to you, here, I'll leave this up for a minute. And I'll show you this quilt. Now, this quilt was made by one of my students, and the idea of this is that she's put put it together into a quilt, which is very cool. And this was made from probably a set of 2.5-inch strips. I don't know if they were a whole set or not, but I think they were. And so it's the same as that pattern, except in order to put it on point, if you put that on point, you'd have a very big square, right? If you put that on point, you've got a big square. So what happens is, you just, instead of having squares, you have triangles on the corner. Do you see?
Yeah.
It's all it is. So you can put it on point, and now the corners are not squares, the corners are triangles instead of squares. And it shortens that whole block. It makes it a lot easier to work with and to deal with, and it looks good. So, isn't that fun?
Yeah.
So, I think you should play with that. Do that. Now I'm gonna put this away before we lose all of it. And then I've got one last example to show you, and then I'm going to show you a couple more blocks, quilts, rather. Oh, this can go back. All the other stuff. Yeah, all of it. Oh, now we can get it.
Flyways.
Okay. This is the last sheet that I've given you. And it's this quilt, which I didn't make. I purchased it. I think the woman did a phenomenal job. This is a bunch of 5-inch squares in a line of fabric for sure. This is coordinated. And it's a lot of work, but it's not hard. It's just a lot of work. But isn't it great? It's called the old Italian block. Some people call it the X block, but it's technically the old Italian block because it's supposed to look like Italian tile.
Oh.
That's why. That's why. And so
We bought it in the Italian market.
I did.
Yeah.
I forgot. I didn't think about that. Yes, I bought this in the Italian market. Well, we got it. Do you mind if I tell a story?
No.
Okay. This is really cool. We like Philadelphia. We have relatives in Philadelphia. We visit them fairly often, maybe once a year, twice a year, maybe. And so there's a place in the Italian market that we like to go to for a breakfast. It's coffee. It's a little tiny shop, and it's called Gleaner's Cafe, and in the Italian market in Philadelphia, down in the Italian Village area. And this cafe, at one point, at a lot of points, has stuff on the walls for sale. They're selling paintings, they're selling whatever. Well, we were there when it was cold, whenever it was, cold and rainy. And the whole thing was covered with quilts all over the walls. Quilts all over the walls. And I died and went to heaven. And so it was pouring down rain. And we went into the thing, and I couldn't sit down because I'm looking at this quilt and that quilt, this quilt and that quilt. They were all for sale, made by one woman named Linda. I found who it was, but I have never been able to communicate with her because she's on TikTok and I'm not, or whatever, I don't know. So anyway, I said, oh my gosh, these are for sale? And they said, yes, this one woman sells her wares, and every month we have some different thing that we showcase for sale. So I had Dan sit at the table while I ran to the bank 3 or 4 blocks down and around the corner in the pouring rain because she only took cash. And so I bought 3 quilts like this, beautiful quilts, 3 of them, and I paid like $650 for 3 quilts. A big tragedy. Should not have done that. And I said to these young ladies who were selling, I said, please tell this lady she's better after I bought mine. She wasn't charging for her time. She barely made the money for the fabric. Honestly, I think this was maybe the most expensive at maybe $350. And it shouldn't be. It should have been well over 1,000. Each of them should have been well over 1,000. So anyway, I just love this. I did give the other 2 away, but I can't give this one away. I just love this one. And so because I have to have a reason for keeping it, I'm showing you how to make it.
The weight's finally, I got blown away.
Now, I have that out. Of course, everything's gone. I'll put it away. Just a minute. All the stuff is here someplace. Make this from 5-inch squares, and I believe she did. I don't really know, but I figured out a way to make it from 5-inch squares. So this is what I would have done, and I sort of think she might have. You're going to take, to begin with, I'm going to pin these in place. It's 2 colors, plus there's another little thing for the center. So when you start, you need a little piece of fabric for the center. But after you've started, you've got a little piece of fabric for the center. You'll see. So we need a light and a dark. And this is 5-inch squares. So I'm going to take one of my 5-inch squares, and I'm going to cut it in half both ways on the diagonal. Okay? Both ways on the diagonal. I'm going to take my other 5-inch square, and I'm going to cut it into strips, 4 strips. If 4 into 5 is 1 1/4, right? 1 1/4 inches, 1 1/4, 1 1/4, 1 1/4. Okay, so I've cut 1 1/4 inch strips out of this one. Yes. Then I'm going to sew them together. So there's the block I'm going to end up with.
What is your seam allowance?
1/4 inch. Same 1/4 inch.
Okay.
Okay. So here's one of the strips that I cut from the light, and 2 of the triangles. Okay. Got that?
Oh, so your centerpiece is coming off of that.
Uh-huh. And so.
Oh!
Thank you. Okay, second one's the same as the first. Got it? Same as the first. Okay. The middle is the other 2 strips with a little something in between. The first time I had to come up with my own little something. But you can see when you cut these, you've got all this extra at the end. So once I've done one of these, this can be the middle for my next one. And I just cut these off and save them. And you pick the middle that you want that goes with whatever one you're doing. So when I put this together, it's this one, it's the middle one, and it's this other one again. I'm just gonna show, oh, now what did you get? What did you get? So do you see? You just have to match your centers, right? Match your seams, that's all. Just match your seams.
It looks like it's horribly hard, but it's not.
It's not. That's the cool thing. It does look hard. But when you break it down, it's just that. And I like this kind of a situation because my ends are too long. So I can now square everything up and make it nice and square in the end, right? I don't have to match some little pointy thing. I'm not gonna do that. And so what I wanna do is make a few of these first, because you don't know how big to make them until you've made a few, because everybody sews a little differently. Everybody's 1/4 inch seam is a little different. And I'm trying to think, I have to think for a minute. Mary Ellen Hopkins, who was a quilter from years ago, who invented a lot of things. And she used to call your 1/4 inch seam your PPM. What's your PPM? And she would say, okay, sew using your PPM. And everybody would say, what are we talking about? Your personal private measurements. Because you all know, especially if you're in a guild and you've made a quilt together, that nobody's 1/4 inch is the same. And so she used to say, just sew it in a PPM, your personal private measurement. So you're gonna do the same thing, and whatever this turns out to be, that's one. Make a few before you start trimming them down, because you wanna get the feel of what you're doing, and it's gotta be trimmed down to your smallest one, right? So make a few, and then, but you don't have to make too many, because your PPM is gonna be the same. And so, once you've got it down, these are all gonna get cut off, and they are all good centers for others. So, isn't that, it's cool, isn't it?
Yeah,
But,
really cute.
that being said, this woman made that quilt. Think about that quilt, and how many of these she's got. I need a drink of water. How many she has in that quilt? I don't know. And she quilted all her quilts. They're quilted in an all over pattern, but she did a wonderful job. Everything's right on. Her points are good. Everything's beautiful, and she charged too little.
She did, far too little.
Okay, just a couple at the end. I do a workshop, and these are a couple of things that I do in the workshop for guilds. And this is what you just saw using 10-inch squares, not 5-inch squares, but in a different method. 10-inch squares. But it's a completely different method, and it's a great method. I love it. And I do teach that in a workshop, but it just shows you this same effect works big or small.
But you could do it the same way, right?
Yes, they're not put together the same way at all.
But you could.
You would.
Seen the extra.
But my way.
Yep.
Those ones came
And
out.
then,
Kept that
yeah. This is what I do with 10-inch squares in another work, the same workshop actually. But these are 10-inch squares, so these are cut from 10-inch squares. They certainly could be 5-inch squares, but the idea of using 10-inch squares is you get 4 of the same color and shape and size, everything at the same time. So that's why I like 10-inch squares for something like this. And this is a quilt I've designed, and I've called it the Friendly Monkey, because it's made from the monkey wrench and the friendship star. That's what that star is. So that uses just 10 10-inch squares and some background. And so this is one of my students. Whoops. One of my students' quilts. And she showed it to me in class, and I wouldn't even let her bind it. I said, I need this. So she didn't even get a chance to bind it yet. But that's a lovely combination of fabrics. and then I'll just show you my last quilt and let you go home. And this is one that we did as a class project from 5-inch squares. This was all 5-inch squares, and this was about 6 packages of 5-inch squares plus background. But I found the pattern, I saw it, but I didn't have the directions for it, so I made up my own directions. But it's pretty simple, yeah. It's pretty long. Yeah, it's yeah.
What's the name of that one?
I called it Celestial Chain. I don't know what the real name. I saw it online someplace, so I know it's got a name, but I'm calling it Celestial Chain. And it's I think 5. Well, supposedly, I think 4 packages of 5-inch squares or a package of 10-inch squares. But what happened is, when I made this, when you use a package of something, you get all of the fabrics that they want you to have in that package, but sometimes it doesn't work for what you want to do. And in this case, I had a lot of fabrics with a lot of white in them. I'm looking for one that I can show you. And I put them in the middle of the stars, yes. And like this. Do you see where I've got a lot of white in the fabric? We can walk.
Yep, right next door you've got another one too.
Yeah. So I couldn't use those every place. So I stuck some in the middle of the stars because they weren't going to touch the white. But when they were going to touch the white background, I couldn't use them. So I had to buy an extra package of 5-inch squares to make it all, work. Well, then I had too many, so I just cut them in half, cut all these 5-inch squares in half and made them for the border. So it actually worked out really well, because these are just 5-inch squares cut in half for the border. And I could use, you see I've got a lot of white ones in there. I could use them in there because I mixed them up with the other fabrics. So this pattern wine is called Forget Me Not. So I'm bringing this out so that you will not forget me. So thank you. I'm allowing you to leave.
No?
Sunny out there all of a sudden. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer your questions either all together or individually or whatever.
All right, let me know when you get back. Thanks for taking the regrets.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
I didn't get home till 3:30.